first item that we want to bring before the committee this evening is Senate Bill 59 by Senator Coleman, which would implement a 75-cent surcharge on fares charged by rideshare companies. And this act would also require that 50% of the surcharges be deposited in a restricted account to be used for street improvements in the municipality where the fare originated, and 50% of the surcharges be deposited in a restricted account to fund Transit Forward Rhode Island. Senator Coleman?
Thank you, Madam President. Excuse me, Madam Chair, colleagues. She's like, you can call me President. So this bill is it's both short and it's simple. It's actually modeled on something that Massachusetts does. This is a rideshare vehicle surcharge in which a small surcharge is added to the top of a rideshare cost. The money in this proposal would be split two ways. It would be split between the funding for the Transit Master Plan, which, as we all know, is in dire need of funding, and also the originating communities. So, for instance, if I get into a lift in Pawtucket and then I ride to Providence, the surcharge money would be split in half. It would be divided evenly between Pawtucket to do complete streets and transit-oriented infrastructure development, and also funding for the Transit Master Plan. That said, there is a technical error in this bill, so I would respectfully request that we hold the bill for further study so we can make some corrections to the language, but happy to entertain questions.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Bell?
Thank you so much, and I support the bill in its overall concept, although mostly because we are in such desperate need of transit funding. However, there's and this may be what you were referring to in terms of the technical error, but we've received written testimony to the effect that the way this is worded, it collects the surcharge on the customer and not on the rideshare company. And was that the technical error you were referring to?
That is indeed the technical error we were referring to. So the aim of this bill is to impose the surcharge on the company, not the customer, which is what Massachusetts does, and that's the aim here. So that's the language we need to fix.
Thank you so much.
Okay. I know we have lots of witnesses, but I just wanted to ask a couple of questions, if I could, Senator.
Yes, please.
Did you explore if taxis would be also included in this?
This would not. This is rideshare vehicles only. One of the pieces of feedback that we have gotten from the Department of Taxation is a suggestion that we clarify that the definition. It is not intended to capture taxis. It is intended to capture, like the Uber, Lyft of the world.
I think that would be good to clarify that. Okay. We do have some witnesses. There'll be more questions from the committee after that. The first witness signed up is Scott Avedizian from RIPTA and also Chris Durand from RIPTA. Welcome. Both speaking in support. Surprised.
First and foremost, like most transit agencies, we are looking at a fiscal cliff when federal emergency funds go away and we see deficits in fiscal 25 approaching approximately $40 million. And it comes at a time when we're just desperately trying, as Senator Coleman said, to make improvements in the transit master plan.
Stop. Excuse me. Do you have your microphone on? The red button needs to be up.
But the red light has a, oh, yes. There we go.
That's good, okay. Thank you.
Sorry. So as I was mentioning, in fiscal 25, we start seeing deficits based on the federal CARES Act and ARPA money running out. And so like most transit agencies across the country, that creates a fiscal cliff for us. At the very same time that, as Senator Coleman said, we're desperately trying to make investments in looking at the transit master plan and starting to implement that. So you most likely have heard from constituents about the challenges that they face in trying to access public transportation. And we know that by imposing this rideshare fee, we expect to see an additional $4 million a year that will allow us to start funding the transit master plan. And then finally, in a former role as the former mayor of Warwick, I can also say that providing the remaining funds to local governments and municipalities for infrastructure is also a wise move. So we're here to appear on behalf of the legislation. Chris, do you have anything you want to add?
Thank you, Scott.
Hey.
Are there any questions or comments for Scott? Yes, Senator Coleman.
Thank you, Director. Just while we have you here, I wonder if you could, for the edification of those of us who are here and listening today, talk a little bit about the potential cuts that are facing RIPTA specifically if we don't fix our funding situation.
So I think we put together a package on what that would look like for our board. We're talking substantial service cuts and substantial layoffs if we don't find a new funding source. And as you know, it's counterintuitive. We're funded by the gas tax, and as we try to encourage more people to take the bus, there's less revenue through the gas tax. So it's a counterintuitive way to try to fund transit.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Director. Appreciate your comments. The next witness signed up is Will Farrell.
Who was in the hall?
No testimony? Okay, he signed up in opposition. Brendan Joyce. Brendan Joyce here? No, he signed up in opposition. Jeremy, is it Costa?
Yeah.
Welcome.
Welcome. Yeah, thank you. Oh, it's nice to be sitting in front of the Senate. Well, I just wanted to, introduce myself. I am a multi-dimensional employee. I do many different things. And Lyft, Uber, DoorDash is one of them. And I would say that you would probably create a strike. Uber and Lyft would most likely leave the municipalities, cities, and towns if you try to extort them for your shortage. So I would not forward this bill if I were you. I would not consider it. There are other ways to fund your municipalities, your RIPTA, your public transportation, but trying to charge people that are, trying to make ends meet, trying to pay bills, take care of family, work these odd jobs, trying to charge them 75 cents every time they pick up a client, that's not going to force people to take the bus. People will ride the bus. People will consider riding the bus. So I would consider you guys actually looking at the cost of other ways to find the funds that you're looking to fill this $40 million deficit before you try to charge people that are trying to make a living 75 cents a fare. For instance, I did 17 orders yesterday. So 17 orders, that's $17. That would be enough to pay for, about 200 miles of gas. So there are other ways that you should consider. One would be using those, what do you call those, little apparatuses you have with the toll tax, maybe charge everyone a toll. Maybe 25 cents. But to specifically target a group of people that are trying to make a living just like you, 75 cents per delivery, I think is ludicrous. There are other ways and other means, but to target a specific group again, now, if I'm not mistaken, there was a bill that was supposed to be passed that you should be looking at it with an equity lens. Most of the people that are driving DoorDash, that are driving Uber, that are driving Lyft, they are people that most likely are not going to fit into your 9-to-5 category. They're most likely people that are trying to take care of family and that are doing it at their convenience. And that is a major inconvenience to charge them an extra 75 cents. Just because Massachusetts is successful doing it doesn't mean that Rhode Island should adapt or adopt any of their, if you want to say treatments or bills. It doesn't work like that. Rhode Island understand that we're close in proximity, but we're a very different state in the makeup of our employees. So, once again, I think this is a no. So, I hope you guys listen to that. Thank you.
I think we have some comments for you and questions for you. Senator Bell, then Senator Coleman.
So thank you so much for your testimony. And I guess I want to say there's one aspect in particular that I do agree with, which is I think it is critical that these costs not be passed on to the drivers. And as we're looking at language to move the responsibility from the riders to the company, I think it is important that we put in place provisions to protect the workers for the company from bearing that burden. So I just want to say on the record, I think that there is a legitimate concern that these corporations may well pass much of the pain, if not the vast majority of it, onto their drivers, and that is something I would say that we would want to avoid. I think we have model language in a number of other pieces of legislation we can look at to at least try and mitigate those concerns.
As long as the customer and the driver are not being affected by the surcharge, and you have the ability to do whatever you want to do with the corporation in itself, and Seattle, whatever, go ahead and do what you got to do. But do not try to charge the driver. The driver is already struggling, most likely. I don't know if you listen to the David Ramsey show, but those people that are doing Uber, that are doing Lyft, that are doing DoorDash, those people are trying to, fix a situation that they're already struggling. So to be charged 75 cents to fix a state entity organization like RIPTA or public transportation, it would be ludicrous. And on top of that, they're only targeting a specific group of people that make less than probably $70,000. If it wasn't for Uber and Lyft, I wouldn't be able to come here and be able to get involved in the policy making, or at least give my opinion, and I would have to do something else. So this gives me the flexibility. Do not try to surcharge, the driver. It's just, it would be ludicrous.
Thank you. Senator Coleman?
Thank you. And just so the clarification that I wanted to offer, I appreciate you coming up, and I agree with you. So what Senator Bell asked me at the very beginning was addressing that. So when I said I'd like to hold it for further study, it means that the problem that we were facing is that the way that the bill is currently drafted would do the thing that you're concerned about, right? Which is not prohibit companies from passing it on to either the driver or the rider. So the aim here, and we're going to hold the bill today and we're not going to vote on it, and the aim here is to do that so it fixes that language. So I appreciate your point. Your point is taken, it's under consideration, and that's why we're going to hang on to it today. But thanks for being here.
Yes, thank you for taking the time for your testimony. I just wanted to follow up, Senator Coleman, if I could ask you a question. That this
Yes.
witness mentioned Massachusetts has this program. And I was wondering if you were familiar with that, and if perhaps we should just look at the legislation in Massachusetts, which would be helpful.
So we did this bill, and I mean, I think it came out very near our deadline, and it had some technical errors just as it came out, and that's fine. And my hope is that the committee process will flag that and other potential areas for improvement. But absolutely, and I will note that I think that Massachusetts has. I mean, it's a bigger state, but they've generated something like $15 million in change in this for their municipalities.
Okay. Thank you very much. We do have one more witness signed up on the bill, and it's John Flaherty from GrowSmart. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity. My name is John Flaherty, and I'm the Deputy Director at GrowSmart, Rhode Island. I'm here to speak in support of this bill. I also agree with Jeremy, and I'm very glad to hear that, that the language is being reconsidered for how it's applied to the company instead of to the driver or the passenger. We know you have many people coming before you every year seeking funding for their agencies. What I will say about this instance is that the agency in question, RIPTA, actually has a data-driven plan for how to use these resources. And the transit master plan that's been referred to and where 50% of the proceeds would go is something that was vetted over a period of nearly 2 years by the public. It was adopted in December of 2020, and we've made only very, very limited investments in implementing this plan since then. I believe that the only instances that have been implemented are ones where RIPTA has been able to secure federal funding grants. We know that from an operating standpoint, that's the biggest challenge for this agency and for maintaining and growing transit service in this state. We believe that investments in quality public transportation are investments in downtown and Main Street revitalization, transportation fairness and justice, climate action, and increased housing production and affordability through transit-oriented development. Those things can't happen without having a quality public transportation system. I typically use the system. Today I couldn't, and the reason I couldn't is because following this hearing, I can't get a bus home to my community because it doesn't run after 5 p.m. So I'd like to be able to do that more frequently. Here's what we know, that we do have a data-driven plan for implementing better transit across the state. There's never been a time where there's been more federal money available to states to help them do this than right now. We also know that in Rhode Island, we rank very low in our state support for transit, particularly when you compare it to other urbanized states in our region of the country. So this is from the Federal Transit Administration National Transit Database. Rhode Island currently invests $18.51 per capita in transit. The next lowest state within our region that's an urbanized state is Connecticut, and they're at $67.84. And then Delaware's 100, Pennsylvania's 120, New Jersey's 142, Maryland's 198, and Massachusetts is 238. So we believe that Rhode Island needs to, especially at this time, Rhode Island's the second most urbanized state in the country. And we know what the mandates are for the Act on Climate. And we also know through this study that implementing this transit master plan would achieve 80% of the state's mandated targets for vehicle miles traveled reductions and associated emissions. So this is a huge win for climate action. And then finally, I wanted to just make the point that there's a lot more Rhode Islanders who have the ability or who can be served by better transit than currently take it. And that number, 77% of our state's population can walk out their front door and reach a transit stop within 10 minutes. That's an incredible number. I don't think any other state can boast that. And yet only 3% or less than 3% use transit as a means to commute. That's a census number. We know that people use it for many more things than commuting to work, but we think that there's a significant opportunity for more Rhode Islanders to save money on their transportation costs by using public transportation, but only if it's going to get people where they need to go, when they need to get there, conveniently and with some dignity. And so thank you for your consideration of this bill and for your time and your public service.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Are there any questions or comments? Yes, Senator Picard.
Thank you. I'm thinking of one of my colleagues here who represents the northwest part of the state who always claims he doesn't have the ability to get busing up there, that type of thing. You see this bill not only as the ability to cover a potential downfall in the future, but to expand the ability to get more buses out there and more buses all over the place?
I'm really glad that you asked that question because it speaks to a point that I wanted to make, and that is that we need a number of sources of new funding to support transit. There is no silver bullet one thing that's going to do it. We know that the gas tax is declining, which is the primary source of revenue that supports RIPTA. And in fact, as part of the Transit Master Plan, RIPTA did develop a pretty dense report on all of the various ways that Rhode Island could support better transit. This is one, and it's only one. And I've looked at some of the data from Massachusetts on the rideshare program and what kind of revenue it's kicking off. This is 2020 data, and I just reference a couple of things. One is that in Massachusetts in 2022, they had 60 million rides. Multiply that by their fee, and that comes out to 12.1 million. Now, understand that, as Senator Coleman mentioned, they had higher revenues going back pre-COVID. 2019, they were at 18.2 million. And now it's beginning to climb back up. Using a conservative estimate of dividing by 6, their population's 6 times ours, multiplied by the rate that's proposed here, suggests that it could reach 7.5 million. We know that implementing the Transit Master Plan is going to take significantly more dollars than that, for sure. And we need to be looking at all those opportunities. This is one.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I also have the Massachusetts statute that includes the language of how they treated how it's applied to companies, and I'm more than happy to provide that if anybody is
Yes,
interested.
if you'd like to give that to the staff over there,
Will do.
that would be great.
Thanks so much.
I'll call him. Okay, any further questions for this witness? There are none. We have 2 more witnesses. They came in later. I'd like to call them up to, we have Patrick Crowley, and then we have another witness. And when it's your turn, you can just state your name. You can go ahead and have a seat. Oh, yeah, and we'll take the next one after you. Welcome, Patrick.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Patrick Crowley. I'm the Secretary-Treasurer of the Rhode Island AFL-CIO, and it sounds like I'm speaking inside of an opera house. Let me see if I can step back a little bit. I'm here and testify in support of Senator Coleman's legislation, with the caveat that thank you, Senator Bell, for raising the issue that I thought was an important clarification. One of the issues with this type of gig economy industry is that when well-intentioned legislators are looking to rein in how they exploit existing loopholes within laws, they always seem to find a way to make sure that either the customers or the workers take the brunt of those meaningful regulations. So it'd be a very good idea if we could find a way to not do that. Billion-dollar corporations versus working-class people trying to eke out a living in a gig economy. I think we know where the money is in that, so that's important. And 2, the last thing I just want to say is I agree with my friend Mr. Flaherty that this is one piece of the puzzle when it comes to funding the Transit Master Plan. It's actually one of the smaller pieces. If we're going to really meet our goals of the Act on Climate and really meet the goals of creating a robust public transportation in the state, this is one piece that we need to do. But it's an important piece because I think it'll send a message to the general public in Rhode Island that the General Assembly prioritizes public transportation for all of the reasons. And Senator Picard, I remember in my confirmation hearing from your colleague, Senator Rogers, about the need to make sure that we expand public transportation to our rural areas. I live somewhere in between. It's a 35-minute walk for me to get to my nearest bus station. It's only a mile and a half. But for someone like me that would commute to Providence, why would I walk an hour and a half? Why would I walk that far to take a 30-minute bus ride? We need to redirect and re-incentivize folks that don't just live in the urban core, but within our ring communities and in our rural communities to make sure a truly statewide public transportation system is truly statewide. So thank you for making raising that issue. I'll stop there and see if there's any questions I can address.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Are there any questions? Comments? No, there are none.
Thank you.
very
Madam Chair, I don't want to get up with my friend here, but I do have to run to another hearing, so I'm going to excuse myself.
That's quite all right.
then.
We understand.
Thank
Thanks. Thanks for your time. Yes, and if you'd like to say your name and who you represent, welcome to the committee.
Thank you. Apologize for being a little sweaty. I sprinted up the hill. When do you ever get to go first? That's so strange.
And is the red button up on your microphone?
Is
Is it on? Yeah, okay.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Liza Birkin, and I lead the Providence Streets Coalition. We are an alliance of 42 community organizations, businesses, schools, neighborhood associations, and thousands of engaged individuals, many of whom are here today, that advocate for safer streets, more transportation choices, and policies that advance mobility justice. And to me, transportation choices include a public transit system that is frequent and convenient, includes late night weekend service that gets you where you need to go on time and reliably. It includes a statewide network of paths for cycling, skating, scooting, using wheelchairs that gets to important commercial and tourism destinations. And it includes sidewalks on every street in the whole state so that you can walk safely no matter where you're going. All of these things cost money, and Rhode Island is notoriously bad at funding them. While we are currently flush with federal dollars, we know that won't always be the case, and our primary source of funding, the gas tax, is declining. We also just got rid of our vehicle excise tax, and we need to raise some reliable, steady funding streams here. And like other folks have said, there are many different ways to do this. And this, I believe, is one of the most low-hanging fruit. This is a clear, obvious way to do it. So to the bill. I was actually living in Massachusetts, going to graduate school, when Massachusetts passed this first-in-the-nation legislation. And in Massachusetts, like everyone has said, it explicitly prohibits, the language explicitly prohibits the companies from passing on the charge to riders or drivers, which I fully support. So I was finishing up my grad work when the projects that were raised by that funding started being built in my community. So Boston in 2018 used $1 million of those dollars from Uber and Lyft to start rebuilding and repairing their sidewalks, prioritizing the most low-income neighborhoods in the city. They also hired more staff in their public works department to work on these projects, so operational funds as well as capital funds. Cambridge used $250,000 of its ride-hailing revenue to install higher visibility pavement markings for new bus lanes on Mount Auburn and Mass Ave. Brookline budgeted $77,000 for 3 programs that increase access to transportation services for seniors in their community. So I literally saw these projects that were funded with these funds come to life, and it was so thrilling. It was so great. And meanwhile, the whole time here in Rhode Island, through a law that was passed in 2017, we are only charging Uber and Lyft $10,000 a year for, so it's $10,000 for a company that has at least 50 but fewer than 200 active drivers, and $30,000 for a company that has 200 active drivers. 30 grand for Uber and Lyft, come on, that's absurd. We know that we are leaving a ton of money on the table. The impacts, as others have said, impacts of companies like Uber and Lyft have been studied to death at this point. It's very devastating. They have kneecapped public transit in many communities. They cause higher rates of traffic congestion and air pollution in our cities. And while they do give drivers some form of flexible employment, we know how hard they fought in California and Massachusetts against bills that would classify their drivers as actual employees, denying them benefits. Just like on Friday, the drivers were protesting outside the State House, advocating for better wages. So we should tax these companies and hold them accountable to providing a community benefit here in Rhode Island. I think the revenues raised by half of the proposed 75-cent surcharge would be extremely helpful to the communities where the rides originated, to build sidewalks and bike lanes and improve bus stops. And then the other half proposed to go to RIPTA, which is desperately needed. But to be clear, it will not plug the massive funding gap that RIPTA faces right now. For that, we'll need a broad-based tax like income, property, or sales tax that is laid out in the Transit Master Plan funding document. But right now, we need to do something. We need to find money from somewhere. And shouldn't it be Silicon Valley billionaires, venture capitalists? Let's make them fund some of our sidewalk repairs. I think it's a no-brainer. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Senator Bell?
Thank you so much, and I agree with your testimony, but I wanted to follow up on on one element, which is that you sort of describe the idea that many of these, the portion of the funding that goes to the municipalities will go to sidewalks and bike lanes. I must express some skepticism on that point. Particularly, the language here indicates street infrastructure improvement. As I read that, it is not clear to me that a sidewalk would meet the definition of street infrastructure. A bike lane perhaps would, although perhaps a separated bike lane might not. I do actually think, the language could be improved to facilitate that, but
Yeah, I agree.
I question the assumption that that is where the funding will go.
Yeah, I fully agree. Thank you, Senator. I think that language should be strengthened to make sure that the funding is used for projects that support sustainable transportation and that help us achieve our climate goals and our equity goals and get people where they need to go safely and easily using less carbon-intensive methods than Uber and Lyft. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Any further comments or questions for this witness? There are none. Thank you so much. Is there anyone else who has not signed up and would like to testify on this bill? Yes, would you like to testify? You can come forward and have a seat and give your name to the committee. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Cedric Yee, and I'm a 14-year-old, and I'm a high school student. I'm a concerned citizen. So I ride RIPTA almost daily, the 33 and 34 routes to get to and from my school
I
because
just want to stop you for one moment and make sure that your microphone is on, that the red button is up.
I believe it's, yeah, okay. Okay.
Very good, thank you.
So I'm sorry, this was very last minute. I don't have a oral testimony written out, but I did submit a written testimony.
Oh, great, thank
to
you.
The, one evening I returned from high school sports, and I looked up the bus schedule, and the next bus was coming in 40 minutes. And this isn't just an isolated case. Rhode Island's public transportation is not adequate to meet the needs of tens of thousands of Rhode Islanders who use our system. And this is not a failure on RIPTA's part, but it's a chronically underfunded system. According to the Federal Transit Administration, in 2021, the state of Connecticut funded $67 per capita for public transportation. Delaware funded $100, New Jersey $142, and Massachusetts $236. And meanwhile, we were at 18. That's 1/8. So, and the quality of public transportation in this state has been declining at an alarming rate, with driver shortages and service cuts and drop trips and fiscal cliffs, and the impending fiscal cliff next year. And I'm assuming somebody else has talked about the benefits of the Transit Master Plan. Yes. Okay.
Yes.
So I'm sure you all know that this plan is necessary for achieving our state's equity, environment, and economic goals. But since it was approved by the legislature 2 years ago, there's been no action on it since. And I understand that finding funding sources is difficult, but this bill is Bill S-59 is one of the easiest ways to do something now. And as mentioned, it's low-hanging fruit. And prioritizing rideshare over public transportation is just inequitable. if you want to look up, so if you want to take a bus from, let's say, TF Green to Providence, it'll cost you $2. But if you want to take Uber, it'll cost $20. And many people have no choice but to fork over those $20. Sometimes because the bus system leaves them behind and can't serve their needs. And according to a study, 53% of rideshare users make more than $75,000 in annual income, compared to the average income per person in Rhode Island, which is $40,000, while 55% of households riding RIPTA make less than $15,000. So protecting the interests of these rideshare companies to the expense of transit riders is just not equitable, and it's not a step in the right direction for the state. So therefore, as many others have said, I urge you to support Bill S-59 to implement a 75-cent rideshare tax with some money going to public transportation improvements, because it would be very beneficial to tens of thousands of transit riders, pedestrians, and cyclists across the state, and it would help build on the equity, prosperity, and resilience of Rhode Island as a whole. Although more does need to be done, we need to find a long-term sustainable funding source for RIPTA, especially with the fiscal cliff that's coming next year. But this is an important first step that can be done immediately with very little trade-off to Rhode Island residents or taxpayers. And supporting this bill will help show your dedication to advancing social and environmental justice in Rhode Island. So thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to seeing you build a more sustainable, equitable, and prosperous Rhode Island for everyone.
Thank you very much for your testimony, taking the time out of your day to share that with us. Any questions or comments from the committee? Yes, Senator Coleman.
Just briefly, thank you so much for coming out. It really means a lot to us, particularly when our younger citizens and younger community members come out and make their voice heard. It really matters. So keep it up. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. That does conclude the witness list, and